meetings for my political party and so on, as you all know it. But it was challenging, of course, enormously challenging, and it always used to be my ambition to be engaged in state politics, and insofar, even if it was very tough, I tried to go through it. And at this time I had already, of course, also overcome this decision question whether I should go into politics or whether I should stay only in business, because the decision was made already from the moment when I came into parliament. My inner motivation, of course, was so high that there was no question just to concentrate on business anymore. And then, of course, in this situation of being, on the one hand, engaged in my usual business, and on the other hand, starting a political career, not only by intention, but by facts, being in parliament and acting as a politician, I had to make my inner decisions how I should not only concentrate, but how I should find my personal way. And what helped me very much was my experience out of business. My experience to set priorities. I just tried for me myself, not writing down a paper or so, but making up my mind. What are the priorities? What do I want to do in politics, and how can I reach that? And that's the way I tried it. Of course, it is not so easy. I just tell you, I started out in parliament, and when you are in parliament, most of the work is done not in the General Assembly, but in the different committees. And so, of course, I thought, okay, if I would come to parliament, I would choose the committee, of course, for economy, for industry, for foreign politics, because this always interested me, and yeah, maybe also social affairs. This was about what I wanted to do. And then I came to parliament, and I got the committee for justice, for internal politics, for transport, and for environment. And this, you have to realize, those are novel situations. You are confronted, most of the time in your life, you will be confronted with situations where you will get different things what you wanted originally. What was the consequence? Of course, I tried, on the one hand, to do my best within those committees, even if I was not so fond about them. And on the other hand, I also tried to do another thing. I tried to become a substitute in those committees I had selected first. And at the end of the period, I had managed at least to get, not in the Foreign Policy Affairs Committee, but I was in the Defense Committee, which was closer to external and security policy than, of course, internal politics, and so on. And so far, well, I could do a few things. The second was that in those sectors where I occupied myself, I tried to occupy myself not only just by sitting in the committee, but by developing a few priorities for this field. My goal was always not to be specific in this up or down to the detail, but to think over the priorities of the field I occupied myself. What are the main problems, what are the main challenges, what are the main goals. And then I tried to contribute a little bit to find solutions. And this went so far that after a while, in the transport sector, they made me responsible to write a new concept for my party for transports. And although I never had done anything on transports before, just the logistics of my company, I wrote down this paper, and okay, this was a success, and this contributed at least for my further career, because people saw that I could bring out results in a specific way with new priorities. And it was then I even had a little dispute with the Secretary General of my party because he presented the paper in the public, because it was a good paper, and of course it was my work. He had done it. So far we had a little dispute, it was not too big, but I also learned that when you have done something, not only stick to it, defend it if it is criticized, but also try to stick to it in a positive way. It's necessary for the whole life. Not only to do something, but also to be aware that you have to communicate about it, because in the world are not only the things that happen in reality, but also the things that happen in mind, and people have to know about it. Okay. Then after a period, we had a new government, and I became a member of this government. I became defense minister. It was absolutely unexpected for most of the people, except for me. Because when you occupy yourself, you get a little bit of feeling for a situation and what is within the frame, what can happen. I would not have been surprised if I would not have become defense minister, because you cannot plan it and there is no option or no security you will have on such an option. But you can analyze it, and if you are realistic, then you will get a feeling for that. And I knew it already 4 weeks before the government was formed. And my party chief and Vice Chancellor Dan told me I should not talk about it to anybody. Anybody, he said. Okay. I even did not tell it my wife. I mentioned that there was a certain chance that I could come into government, but I really didn't talk about it. The only thing I made was that during those 4 weeks, I occupied myself not reading 100 papers about defense policy. I had been in the defense committee already before, but tried to find for myself the priorities that I should try to handle and to manage within my period as defense minister. And you will not believe it, this was the basis for my work for 10 years in the defense ministry. Because I had for myself a very clear outlining which goals I wanted to reach as defense minister. And the experience I made was that when I started my job as defense minister, it was in a way that I gave to my chief of cabinet a list of 10 questions I wanted to have answered by the cabinet or by the ministry. It was even before I had sworn my oath, my formal oath. And this was not only, there was not only the intention to get answers for specific questions, But it also was the trial not to lose the offensive from the first moment. Because I thought, you know, the biggest problem, I had worked for a company with 1,500 people before. Suddenly I was responsible for 50,000 people. And I knew also problems were just out of this enormous organization, you will be confronted with problems, everyday problems, every day. And if you don't have a clear mind about your goals, about your priorities, and also about the direction, and what I mean is that you set the goals, that you go into the offensive and not just be defensive in a way that the problems come up to you. And this was probably one of the most decisive things, just to keep the offensive. And when I say the offensive, then I think not of being offensive, but being dynamic, being the leader. What I try to do is just to act leadership. And this is not only in the business world, but also in politics, from enormous importance. When you are in a leading function, then you have to try to lead. This is the sense of it. Not just to wait for ideas, but to set the ideas. Yeah? Try to be open and sensitive for other ideas, but then just try also to formulate them and set them in action. Okay. This was then a job for 10 years. Of course, it was quite interesting, and with this philosophy, I probably could not only influence Austrian security policy, but also European policy, a little bit at least. I was the defense minister who initiated and organized the first European defense minister meeting that had not existed before. Nobody could imagine nowadays that it would not exist, and a few other things. But this is something. And of course also the period was fascinating for me, really fascinating, because this was the period in the 90s with the big changes, political changes in Europe and the whole world. Yeah, after this function I was one of the speakers of the Austrian Parliament, one of the presidents, and then I became president of Political Academy, and also in the second function, president of the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy. And there again, I made the same experience. It's absolutely important to have an idea about the main goals, the main principles, the main steps you want to take in the business you are responsible for. And in politics, it's even more important than in any other field, probably, to have a clear idea about your principles. I had already had the chance to work out our party's program in the middle of the 90s. Still our party's program now after 15 years. This was a lot of thinking, really a lot of work, and trying, you know, to find compromises between the different parts